Today's workshop is aimed at developing and communicating your scholarly identity. And because of my office's role on campus and the things I'm most interested in, I'm of course thinking about this through the lens of you applying for funding applications. But a lot of what we're going to cover here today is applicable to a number of different settings, such as cover letters when you go on the job market, or if you are speaking at a conference and you're asked to provide a brief bio of yourself, or even just sort of the way that you might want to verbally introduce yourself and the work you're doing when you're networking at a conference, or even just in your own head. So you can be thinking about the sort of scholar or professional you are hoping to become, what you want to do in your career, and sort of what you want the broader impact of your career to be, so that while you're still a graduate student, you can be thinking about different ways to demonstrate your commitments and different ways to build the skills you'd like to have. Excuse me, I have to clear my throat every once in a while because I have a 2-year-old in daycare, and so we're into that time of year where I'm just going to perpetually have a scratchy throat and a runny nose, and there's not much I can do about it other than just, muddle through as best we can. So in the course of today's workshop, we're going to work on sort of defining what scholarly identity and professional identity means, considering your broader impacts and the context in which you operate as a scholar or professional, thinking about how you connect your past experiences to your goals. So whether it's in a funding application or other venues, people don't really care about stuff you've just done in the past, right? Like that's the point of a CV. The goal of anything beyond a CV is to connect that past experience to your potential to do things in the future, and sort of, not just to bring up what you've already done, but to show how it indicates that you will be able to do other things, or um, I don't know, like that it attests to something important about you. Well, thinking about also explaining your research agenda and the significance of your research, and then sort of putting all of that together into a cohesive sort of narrative of yourself as a professional, as a scholar. You can think of this as sort of crafting a mission statement for yourself, doing the work that you're hoping to do in the field that you're doing it. I'm also happy for you all to just take yourself off mute or to drop questions in the chat throughout this meeting today. I think, this is a small group, and there will be times where I'm going to make you actually do some things, so you're going to have to work a little bit. But I think it's also nice if we have a little bit of interaction. So defining scholarly identity. Your professional or scholarly identity is going to define who you are, the work you do, and ideally it's going to do that in a pretty concise way, but also in a pretty compelling way. So this is not a place to be thinking about sort of high-level technical terminology or jargon, but instead thinking about sort of the plain language you will use in like an elevator pitch. Your professional identity should also clearly indicate your motivations. Why do you care about what you want to do? What has motivated you to get into this? Some people have really great origin stories. Others of us just sort of realized topics and problems we were interested in along the way. But either way, you have a motivation to do the work you're doing. Something has led you to think that it's important, and you should be able to communicate that really clearly to yourself, but also to other people. Your scholarly identity also incorporates sort of your values and commitments as a researcher, as a scholar, as an academic, as a professional. You're going to have broader impacts outside of just immediately the work you do. Maybe that's through mentoring, maybe it's through service, maybe it's through other forms of outreach. But whatever it is, there's ways that you're showing your values both through the research you're pursuing, but also in those other venues. And it also should clearly connect to your goals. So how do your motivations and your values have a clear trajectory to what you want to go on to do through your graduate career and beyond? Again, this is an essential thing to do in fellowship and grant applications, where they're asking for things like a personal statement or a bio sketch, where they're assessing things like the qualifications and fitness of the researcher to do the project. So really, this is an essential skill in funding applications. But again, it's also really, it's what you're doing in a job application. It's what you're doing in any venue where you're trying to establish your credentials and your expertise. And sort of primary elements are who you are and why your work matters. And so those are the things we're really going to be focusing on today, and really trying to draw connections between them. In the context of fellowship applications, there's almost always two documents. I mean, it depends on the exact thing you're applying for, but in a lot of different funding opportunities, you're going to have a personal statement and you're going to have a research proposal. The personal statement is sometimes also, you might have again, it might be called a bio sketch, or you might just have a cover letter. But what you're doing in a personal statement is providing information on your background and your qualifications, your motivations, and your goals. And you're trying to tie all those things together so that there's a trajectory of what has brought you to whatever this particular opportunity you're applying for is, and then how you're going to get from this to where you want to go. Your research proposal is explaining your research project, the specific aims or research questions that you have, the methodologies you're going to use, what other, whatever the sources, the data, the evidence employed in your research is, and then really importantly is to communicate what the significance of your work is. So significance, you can think of it as both the in-field contribution, and yes, that's important. But really, what's important is that you are showing that you understand sort of the broadest possible significance of your work and that you're placing it into a broad context. Well, you have these different elements in a funding application. You want to aim for having cohesion across. You want those different elements to all sort of work together, to be written in the same voice, where it's clear the same person is writing the different elements of the application, because you really want it to provide a cohesive and consistent narrative across the different documents in a funding application. So ideally, these things should complement each other without being redundant. Like there might be sort of key elements you want to have show up in a couple places, but anytime there's redundancy, it should be really strategic and not just sort of happening because you're of sloppy editing or not really thinking through what should be allocated where. And this narrative that you're trying to craft between these documents should integrate your background, your experiences, your motivations, your values, your goals, your research agenda, your broader commitments. All of that should be sort of coming through as a cohesive portrait. So that's a lot of different elements to consider. That's a lot of different moving parts. It's a lot to communicate in documents that can sometimes be pretty short. You might have a one-page personal statement. If you're interested in applying for Fulbright, you don't even have a one-page personal statement. You have a 1,500 character, including spaces, essay on basically your motivation and goals, 1,000 characters on what you're going to do after Fulbright, and then another 1,500 characters on how you're going to engage the community while you're on a Fulbright. All of those things used to fit into a personal statement, but now they've been broken out into these separate short answer essays, and you no longer get a standalone personal statement. So you're still trying to get all these elements of yourself to come through in what can sometimes be quite limited space. And this is important because selection committees increasingly care about what might be termed broader impacts. So broader impacts is specifically the language that the National Science Foundation uses when they are assessing, and they will ask for it specifically in applications. They want to even see you have a header that says broader impacts, and they want to see the broader impacts of both the research and the researcher. So for the National Science Foundation, broader impacts for the researcher might be things like you're interested in building conduits to get, between K-12 education and college level education, so that you are maybe doing like outreach to elementary schools and engaging younger kids and creating a pipeline to STEM education. So things like that are part of your broader commitments or your broader impacts. Overall, broader impacts can include things like your values and commitments that motivate your work. Why is this work important? What has brought you to doing this? How can you communicate that importance to other people? Do you have particular service, mentoring, or teaching roles that intersect with your research? Or maybe they don't intersect, but do you have those? Do you play those roles? Do you seek out opportunities like that? How do you situate yourself in the broader profession? Are you are you thinking about things that, do you think there are sort of issues in the profession that you want to change? Are there ways things work in your field that you think could be better? These might be questions of like, whose voices get listened to in the field, or even the way that your field overall brings in and interacts with like the public. That's long been a criticism of various fields of academia, right? That they're so disconnected from the concerns of um, people outside of academia that, you know, the research you're doing isn't really valuable to anybody other than a handful of other researchers. So maybe you're interested in sort of shifting the way your field engages with various audiences. Things like that matter. If those are some of your commitments, or if those are some of the broader impacts you're interested in having, those are things worth communicating. And I already said I wrapped engage the public into that one, so I'll skip that bullet point. Excuse me. And similar with sort of push your field, the profession, the academy, you can be thinking about those as part of situating yourself within the broader profession. So you can read through these, and I bolded the place where I think this person did a good job of making those things clear. But this was from a Ford Foundation pre-doctoral fellowship from a few years ago. That award no longer exists, but this is still, it asked for a personal statement as well as a statement on previous research and a research proposal. So it had a number of different elements that allowed you to communicate these things. And you can see this person, they talk about both the things they've done concretely, like I've done this thing, but I've done it because it allowed me to achieve this goal or to demonstrate this value or commitment that this researcher has. I will also send all of you the this PowerPoint later. So in addition to having the recording available, you can refer back and read through these things in a bit more detail.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. When you're thinking through your own broader impacts, there's a couple things I think are really important to do. And one is to know that like examples of broader impacts don't always have to be these really big, significant things. Sometimes it's like a one-day thing you did. For many of us through graduate school, there's things you want to do and you just haven't had a chance to do many of them yet. So your avenues for having demonstrated some of these things you think are important just may not be that robust. And so you may feel like I don't have this big significant thing to talk about. And that's okay. Sometimes we even forget or don't assign enough importance to some of the smaller roles that we do, like some one-off things. And when I was in grad school, I participated for one day as a judge for the local like high school history fair, and like it was just a one-day thing. That was the only time I was invited to do it. But as soon as I was invited to do it, I was eager for that opportunity. It was the sort of thing I thought was important. But because it was just a one-day thing and not like a very formal, program where I like was involved beyond that one day, it was easy to forget that that was something I'd ever done. But that could be worth a sentence or two in a funding application if I were talking about why I think engaging K-12 is important. Sometimes your broader impacts may have happened in venues far outside of your professional or academic settings. Um, for instance, there's a student I worked with a couple years ago, a master's of social work student. They were applying for an award that needed them to talk about sort of leadership and organizational roles that they've played. And they were thinking, most of my time I've been doing independent research. When I've been on a research team, I've been the junior member. I haven't really had leadership and organizational roles in my academic setting. And so they were just kind of blanking on what to write for that particular part of this application. But then the student remembered that, you know what? I mean, not even remembered. It just occurred to them that um, to ask me if it would be worth talking about something they do far outside of their professional life, which is they're involved in sort of facilitating like a fandom community. And they've been very, very involved with this over years. They've helped organize conventions. They've like been in charge of the online portion of that community. They particularly did a lot of like organizing work and connecting people during COVID when they couldn't have their in-person meetups. And so they shifted to an all online. And so this person had a lot of organizational experience working through this organization and a lot of leadership experience through that organization, and wound up writing about that and using that as evidence for this other award that they were applying for, which was for the Council on Social Work Education, and they got the award. It's like a major award. And so don't discount the things that happen outside of what you think of when you're wearing your like professional or scholarly hat, right? There might be things that you've done that still matter and that still give you something to talk about in different applications or a way to at least demonstrate that you are engaging with building these skills. It's also worthwhile to think prospectively. Again, like you may not have had an opportunity to do something yet, but there might be, you might have an opportunity to engage in a certain way in the spring. And so you're already thinking that that's coming. And that can still be worth addressing in an application. You can talk about the things you're going to do, if you've already got those things lined up, but even just for yourself of thinking through, if you know what your interests are, chart out ways you can engage those interests. So let's take 5 minutes and think about these things. So just for yourself, take 5 minutes and think and write down what are some of your broader scholarly or social commitments? What sort of service, leadership, or outreach have you or will you engage in? What experiences of formal or informal teaching or mentoring have you engaged in? And again, mentoring can be as simple as like, um, doesn't these don't have to be formal things where like you have served officially as a mentor. It could be that you have gone out of your way to um, help like incoming students to your department feel welcomed and help them feel acculturated to your department, right? Informal mentoring like that still matters. Have you or will you engage with broader public audiences? Is that important to you? Do you think there's ways that you want to do that if you haven't already, or are you interested in practicing those skills even in, again, sort of other settings that may not be my office runs a graduate student op-ed competition, which if you're interested in, please follow up with me because we are currently in the registration period for it. So like maybe you haven't published an op-ed actually out there in the wild like in a newspaper, but are you engaging in opportunities like that through the university so that you're practicing the skills of public engagement? Does anybody feel like they're just completely blanking here? Why do you think you're blanking, Melissa? That's fair. I mean, I would say it seems like right off the bat you have a commitment to service and public service, right? I mean, 14 years in the military demonstrates that very well, and that's absolutely something a number of funders would care about. And if you're interested in going into any sort of public service or uh, like state or federal employment, that's a really powerful way to demonstrate that you already are committed to that type of work, that you are committed to the greater good and to a career of service. I would think you also have pretty good experiences of leadership to pull out of those 14 years, I would imagine. Yeah, I mean, okay, perfect. So like I think you're in a really excellent yeah, yeah. I think you're in a really excellent position to be able to draw a strong trajectory from your past experiences to your motivations and your career goals. Yeah, absolutely, James. Thank you for that comment. I think that is a challenge sometimes is you may not recognize the scope of everything that you did, and you may not be thinking, I mean, you served for 14 years, you're thinking just sort of, yeah, of course I did that. But to a lot of other people, that's a really long history of a whole bunch of different stuff that you did. You have a lot of different things to pull out of that. Okay, well, let's move along. So speaking of connecting past to the present, particularly in the context of funding applications, I think it's really value or critical to remember that every personal statement, or sorry, that people don't fund the past. Like that is not what they're doing when they're reading your funding application. They don't care about everything you've done. Like that is not what they're funding. They're funding what you say you're going to do in the future. So your past experiences only matter in how they connect to your present work or your future aspirations. Um, and you already are, you already have limited space in a funding application. And so if you're, especially if you're also including a CV or resume, you don't want to just tell people about things that your CV or resume is already saying, right? It's not, the point is not just to say, I did this, I did this, I did this. But for everything that you did, there should be some sort of takeaway. You should be asking yourself, why do I want the reviewers to know I did this thing? What is important about this thing I'm sharing with them? So previous experiences are there to show readers that you have the skills and qualifications necessary to conduct whatever it is you're proposing you're going to do. So if that's research, um, you want to show them that you have, previous research skills that allow you to do the proposed research. But if it's some sort of leadership or experiential opportunity, like if you're going to go do an English teaching assistantship through the Fulbright program, you want to show them that you have some experience already that's going to equip you to be an effective English teaching assistant. So your past experience is there to demonstrate that you can do whatever it is you're proposing to do. So again, this is pulled out of the same example that we had last time. And I think the student does a really good job of every time they say, I did a thing, they tell you why that thing was important, what skills or, well, primarily what skills they pulled out of it, but also some perspectives they were able to get through it. Like, I think that last sentence is a good one for a person proposing to go into a doctoral program, right? Like, yes, when you're in undergrad and sometimes even in a master's, you're getting very broad education, but as you specialize in your research, you got to have some way of narrowing that down. And so showing the readers how it is that you landed on your particular slice of research can be important. And so the red highlights are um, the so what for each of the experiences the student talks about. No, I see your question about thoughts on comedy as an asset. I mean, I think, like my number one answer for almost anything in the world of funding is it depends. Um, there might be really good ways to bring that up in particular funding applications or depending on what it is you're applying to do. I think in some areas it doesn't matter, but I mean, if you're also thinking about just sort of the way that you present yourself, particularly in like networking settings, obviously, um, being comfortable with yourself and uh, being a person with a good sense of humor can go a long way to easing those social interactions. So with this idea in mind that the past matters, but only in the way that it connects to the present or to your future goals, which is redundant because goals are always future. Um, Take a moment for our second brainstorming here and list out. I'm sure you are, Noah. Um, List out courses, projects, things like that that have been central to the skills and methods your research centers on or your work centers on. And for each of those things you want to list out, force yourself to write one or two takeaways. Because again, the point is to tell people why that experience mattered, not just to tell them that you had that experience, right? So your CV is already going to contain the list of all the things you've done. The point here is to tell yourself why those things mattered and what it is you'd want a reviewer to know about that experience. And it doesn't just have to be courses or projects. Like you can think of internship experiences you've had, work experiences you've had, basically any previous experiences that you think are relevant for what you want to do, what you're doing. List those and then give yourself that one or two sentence takeaway for that experience. Hi, welcome, Desmond. I see that you just joined. We are just currently brainstorming the things that are on the screen share. So we're thinking about previous experiences and providing one or two takeaways for why that experience has been important for your scholarly or intellectual development. Yeah, you're welcome, and welcome to the workshop. Again, I'll ask if anybody feels like they're completely blanking on this one. anybody want to share?
I'm actually stuck between how much should be specific or how specific they should get.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair question. I think again it will depend on the context in which you're communicating.
Yeah, I can try one here. If you want.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I put in the chat, but I work as a sound tech, and I think that's important to the arts of writing. I think it's just important to support the community from a background role. If you're going to be like,
You know, like time matters way more
I think
than
it's put on that as like I've worked
No, there's a lot of background noise going on. I can't hear everything that you're saying.
Let me put it into the chat here.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's a good way of like thinking why that role helps demonstrate some of the values and commitments that you have. I think another takeaway would be like I mean, again, context dependent. So where it is you're communicating this idea, but also think about like what are the actual skill takeaways from that? How like if you're applying for a fellowship and you want to include that as something you've done and you're trying to tell the reviewers why it matters, can you also connect it more broadly to are there um, has it helped you be a better collaborator? Has it helped you do this or that or gain certain perspectives on um, why different types of engagement are important, right? I mean, if you're a sound tech, presumably there's an audience, so you might be thinking about that. So there's different sort of, the context in which you're doing this will help you decide both the level of detail and what type of takeaway is most important to communicate to the readers for that particular um, setting.
That's fantastic. It's almost like an in-person editor as opposed to like you on stage and audience.
Right.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So these things that we've gone through in the last two brainstormings are really aimed at the who you are section of your scholarly or professional identity. You're aiming to sort of integrate your values, your experiences, your commitments, the impacts you want to have into a narrative of you as the researcher. Because, while there might be many people who are doing similar research to you or engaged in similar types of projects or types of work that you're doing, we all have different motivations for doing it. We have different angles we're bringing to it. We have different perspectives, different backgrounds. We're approaching the work in slightly different ways. And that's what makes things different, right? There might be two or three people doing very similar projects, but the way you're thinking about that project, the way you're thinking about yourself approaching it, and you're thinking about the significance of that project overall, that's what will make yours stand out over the others. So very quickly, just go back and look at the two things you've brainstormed already and see if you can sort of draw together some connections between them. Can you pull out of that things that help motivate, can you pull out of the stuff you've already written down ideas about your motivations? Can you think about particular people, ideas, or values that have influenced the work you're doing, where you are, your motivations? What of those previous research experiences have most directly related to where you are now or where you're hoping to go with the work you're doing? Do some of those broader impacts that you listed, such as mentoring, outreach, teaching, service obligations, things like that, have they influenced your research? Are they connected with the research? Or are they sort of parallel to it and separate from it? Has your research helped you think about some of the other ways that you hope to have an impact outside of just sort of academia or your scholarly work? And the point there is to think about whether your research agenda and your sort of broader impacts really have a nexus between them. And usually there is, right? Like if you have strong commitments in some areas, your work is usually demonstrating that, as well as like your extracurricular, your service, your leadership roles, things like that. Another good way you can think about this, or another way you can think about broadening that impact, broadening the significance, is to answer the question of who do you hope your work or your research helps? So just in the interest of time, we'll only take a few minutes here so we can move through the other slides. But again, this is an exercise I encourage you to come back and sort of be thinking through these things really always. I mean, the point of all of this is just to try to be as intentional as you can about um, what it is you're doing and the opportunities you're going to seek out. Take just one more minute here. And since I mentioned the op-ed competition a bit ago, I'm dropping the link to it in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more and considering participating, find all the information on that webpage. Okay, so we thought a lot about the sort of who you are side of things. The next part of your scholarly identity, of course, is what your work is and why it matters side of things. So by connecting your background, experiences, and broader commitments to your research or work, you've told readers who you are as a researcher. Your scholarly identity also includes your unique research agenda. And you need readers to understand what you do and, really importantly, why that matters. They need to understand the broad significance of the work that you do. And in a funding application, in a cover letter, in a application or a proposal to a conference or whatever, you need to do that pretty immediately. Like you cannot, beat around the bush. You can't clear your throat a bunch. You need to be able to communicate the significance of your work in very clear and concise and immediate language. I think a good way to do this in all these different settings is to think about selling the excitement of the work. There's something that brought you into thinking what you're doing is important. And I know sometimes the drudgery of grad school can sort of make you forget sometimes what it is that excited you about what you're doing, why you got into this field to begin with. You can lose sight of what those bigger questions were, what those bigger motivations are. And so every time you work on a funding application or a cover letter or things like that, it's a chance to pull yourself back out and try to um, reignite that excitement for yourself, but also have it come through for your readers. So there's something that makes your particular questions or your particular field really compelling, really intriguing. Start there. Think about what those things are. And some of the ways to do that are to think about, what are the sort of big some of the big like well, okay, so Trayshawn, I think, you're talking about faith, maybe so are you in religious studies?
No, it was more just like for me studying reentry, it stems from this faith-based belief that people need to be restored, but not everyone that I'm, writing to is going to share that faith-based belief. They may share the restored piece, but not necessarily the faith part that excited me.
Right. Um, yeah, and I think sometimes, the trick is to try to pull yourself back out to the sort of like biggest, most universal um significance, the biggest and universal significance that your work or your project may hold. So if you're concerned that you might lose some reviewers with faith as a motivation, then I think maybe that's again, it's always context dependent. But in some contexts, what might be the most compelling piece to communicate is that restorative justice side of things. That's a pretty shared goal, regardless of the motivations that bring various people into it, whether their motivations are faith-based or secular. They share a goal, they share an outcome. So get them excited about what's promising about your approach to achieving that same outcome. Um, I think a lot of fields, and often that's a thing to do for all of us is sort of pull ourselves back from like the individual small questions we're pursuing through our research and to think, what is it that unites? Like, so again, I'm in history, I'm in humanities. I studied free people's motivations in the U.S. South in about 1865 to 1915. It's a pretty small slice of research. But it engages also big questions about belonging, about citizenship, about migration. And these are things that my colleagues in religious studies, in English, and sociology also care about. They're asking the same questions, but in different ways through different methodologies and, focusing on different eras. But we have a similar set of questions about how people find belonging and how that relates to engaging in sort of active citizenship. So pull yourself back to whatever those big questions are, because then you can bring in readers and reviewers to get excited about your work who aren't interested in the same narrow slice of research, but they are interested in those same shared big questions. Yeah, that's funny. Noah, there's I think it's a book by CLR James. And he just there's a footnote I often like to bring up with students when I was teaching that he uses a whole footnote just to say others have disagreed with me on this. I stand by my conclusions. Doesn't cite anything, just inserts a little sort of like petty, yeah, I don't care what others have said.
It's in so much of it. So much of academic writing does this.
Yeah, I also I where I did my master's, I was taught by a guy who's a medievalist, and he got a book review on his book that he didn't like. He wrote a 64-page rebuttal to the like 2-page book review, and self-published it through the university. So academic pettiness is a lot of fun sometimes.
Yes.
So after sort of thinking through that broadest, like how you can frame that really broad significance around whatever it is that's exciting, that's more universal, that will bring in other readers, work to claim the significance by, crafting a nice, cohesive claim of significance. And you should think of that doing a few things. It should set the significance in the broadest context for a non-specialist audience. Again, context matters here. Some awards, some venues, you might be applying for things where it's only going to be other readers in your more immediate subfield, in which case you can probably use a little bit more technical terminology or jargon. But in general, when you're just sort of thinking through like your paragraph that's going to lay out the significance of the work you're doing, you should think about that as being approachable by non-specialists. You want to quickly indicate how your work connects to or departs from previous research in the field so that what you're trying to do is to establish why what you're doing is new and different. So this isn't the place for a lengthy lit review, but to very quickly say, a sentence that establishes sort of the gap you're filling, or that this is a neglected area, or that it's building on something that some people's work is only possible now because of new tools or new approaches. So if that's true for you, indicate that, because that can help get a sort of timeliness component of your work across. And you can also think of a phrasing, even in your own head, that will help you clarify this by quickly answering the question that with the work you're doing, we'll either be able to answer X, do Y, or better understand Z. I think those three phrasings fill in for a lot of different ways that you might want to claim the significance. So you'll either be able to now do something, um, answer a long-standing question, or better understand some phenomenon or some topic that we're all trying to understand, like questions of belonging, for instance. Okay, you got a few minutes, so we'll take like 3 minutes, and you can just take a minute and think about this. Not everybody will answer all of these questions. I think it depends a little bit on what your work is. If you're doing something that's more, practical and application based, if you're in a STEM field, you might answer this question in a very different way than somebody in the humanities will, for instance. And again, this is a place, we're only going to take another like 3 minutes to look at this right now. So come back and work on this on your own. And of course, again, the goal with all of this is to be thinking about the way that you can put all this together, that these things can be integrated in the way that you want to present yourself. Um, I went to graduate school. A guy in my doctoral cohort was super intentional about all this stuff, and um, we're 6 years post graduation, and he's already an associate professor and moved to a different university. He got associate and then moved. He didn't move to get associate, so but that was always really David's strong point, is that he came into graduate school knowing exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to take classes in both history and sociology, develop his methodologies in both ways. He already knew what his dissertation project was going to be. We went to Rice, so he was really strategic in focusing on a topic that took place just in Houston, so that his research was really local. Um, he was able to finish a year before most of us, and it did not take him very long to turn that dissertation into a book. So I think David's a sort of like portrait of a researcher who's long thought about these things and has really done a good job of integrating them. He sought out as a graduate student a lot of opportunities that he wanted to use to grow in various ways, both in terms of the actual skills he wanted to have when he graduated and the research he wanted to do, but also like he went on to he was previously the director of the Center for Black Life at the University of South Florida. Um, and so he was interested in sort of administrative and leadership things like that as well. Thinking through student support, like the type of teacher he wanted to be. He's just a super intentional guy who thought about all of these things and who has a really clear like idea of himself as a scholar. Um, and that's the goal, is to be able to be thinking intentionally about all of this and realizing that your background, your motivations, your goals, your values, that plus like the research or work you want to do, all do like they sit at a nexus together. And that nexus, when it's clearly communicated, um, is a portrait of you as a researcher, as a professional, with your own unique motivations, a defined and compelling research agenda, a set of broader commitments, broader impacts that you're interested in, and so that all of this can be something that you can boil down to like basically a sort of mission statement of you as a person in your field and your profession. And of course, then understanding that like you're going to tailor this for individual opportunities. No one funding application is going to have the same set of reviewers. They're not going to have the same different written components. They're going to be looking for different things in their review criteria. A funding application is really different from a job cover letter. It's really different from the other places that you might be communicating the same information. So tailor it as needed for the context, for the audience. But for yourself, I think it's valuable to have a sort of long version, be adding to this, be thinking about it. It's sort of like, sometimes there's a suggestion to keep a sort of master CV for yourself where you list everything out and then you edit that down for the different things where you're going to use that CV. Exactly. It is easier to cut than to generate. So do the same for this. As you're thinking about these things, be refining this. Make it something that you are intentional about, that you're returning to at the end of each semester and sort of like listing out what are those sort of one-off or one-day things that you did that you might otherwise discount if you didn't go ahead and write it down at the time you did it. So keep a sort of like a hidden document that's just for you. It's just for you to help clarify all of these things. But if it's clear to you, and that's really the goal of everything we did today, is to have this be clear to you, because if it's clear to you, you'll be able to communicate it more clearly to everybody else as well.